Hello. Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for Deepa to request to join, and then we'll get started. Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. This is so exciting. We're just waiting for Deepa. We were just talking, so I know she is around. While we wait for her, my name is Catherine Foley. I'm the project assistant at BMP. We're still waiting for her. Where is she? Now. Hello.
Hi.
Hello. We have roughly over 100 people, so I think we should go ahead and get started. We're limited on time anyway.
That's great. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Catherine.
Hello. So welcome to the first of our IG Live series focusing on the social change ecosystem map created by Deepa Iyer, who is live with us. My name is Catherine Foley, and I'm the project assistant at Building Movement Project. I'll be helping to host these live streams. We're so pleased that so many people have found this framework useful and that so many of you have joined us today. It's so exciting. As a reminder, we'll be saving this to our IGTV. So if you have to hop off or if you know someone who wants to join but couldn't, they can watch it later. This will probably be about 30 minutes long, but if folks have questions, we're happy to stay on longer. So before we get into things, I just want to share a little bit of information about BMP. So the Building Movement Project is a national nonprofit organization that pushes the nonprofit sector to address the significant social issues of our time. So we do this through research, through tools and training, and our main focus areas of leadership, movement building, and service and social change. You can get involved with our work and stay up to date with it at buildingmovementproject.org and on our Twitter, BLDING Movement. You can also check out the social change ecosystem map, which is on our website, buildingmovement.org, and in the link in our bio. I will finish up by introducing Deepa, the creator of the social change ecosystem map. So Deepa is our senior advisor here at BMP. She is also the director of Solidarity Is, Deepa, the one and only. I just saw that. She is the director of Solidarity Is, which is a project that generates tools, trainings, and narratives to facilitate transformative solidarity practices. She is also a social change activist, a lawyer, a writer, and she recently authored the book, We Too Sing America, South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh immigrants shape our multiracial future. Deepa is also someone that I admire so much, so I am so pleased to introduce her here and to begin this conversation around her work. So welcome, Deepa. Thank you for being here and for creating this. If you have anything you want to share, please.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for the introduction, for doing this. I just want to say that I could not be doing any of this work on the social change framework if it weren't for people like Catherine. I also want to shout out Shelby House. There are lots of people who've been so helpful in getting this to happen. So thank you to those of you. And a great thank you and debt to the Building Movement Project, which has been so kind to host me and my work as well. So I wanted to just say thanks for being here. I am really new to, as Catherine knows, new to Instagram and Instagram Live. And so I'm going to try to get through this with hopefully as little technical difficulties as possible. But I love seeing all the comments come up. Hi Preeti, hi Manpreet. There's so many people on here that I love very dearly. So thank you for joining. So I wanted to just start with a couple of really quick opening remarks, and then, Catherine and I are going to be in conversation, and we'd love to hear from you, your reflections and questions as well. So the first thing I wanted to say is just to acknowledge the moment that we're in, right? We are in a moment right now where there is tremendous change and upheaval going on in our society, in our country, and in the world. In 2020, just in 2020, right? The pandemic, and then of course the uprisings that we're seeing right now. And I think all of us know that with both the pandemic and the uprisings, we're just seeing what has been there for generations, whether it is racial disparities, whether it is violence towards Black people, whether it is the unjust ways in which our systems and institutions are set up in this country to favor certain groups of people over others, right? And so in the midst of all this, though, in the midst of all this uncertainty and fear, I think there's also possibility and there's hope. And so whenever we have these two things happening, the unrest and the uncertainty, we also have the possibility and hope. And there is this moment where I think each of us has to decide, how do we show up? Right? How do we kind of lean into the hope and possibility, even though we are constrained by the uncertainty, the fear, our past traumas, our own insecurities, our feelings of lack of connection, and the like. So you might be joining today with a feeling of grief and loss. You might be joining feeling numb or feeling stuck. You might be joining with confusion in your mind. You might be exhausted and fatigued. You might also be motivated and catalyzed by all of the energy around you. So however you're joining, this is a welcoming space for you, and we're grateful to have you here. And I hope that this particular framework can actually be a way to help to clarify and catalyze. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, about how you can use it, how your ecosystem can use it, and any other questions that you all might have. So turning it back over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Just as a reminder, folks, if you want to send any questions, please do it through the comment box, and I'll scroll through and keep an eye on that. So Deepa, given the context that you just described, what can people get out of using this framework?
Yeah, thank you. And I also just want to encourage folks, if you feel safe enough or vulnerable enough to share, just share a little bit about where you are right now, right? I mentioned those twin feelings of uncertainty and hope. I'm feeling really exhausted in this moment, I will say, and I'm also feeling energized at times. So by the hour, it shifts for me. So, however you're feeling, would love to hear where your energies are. So as you asked, Catherine, how can folks use the framework? So a couple of ways I'll quickly talk about. So I wrote this up when I was feeling extremely confused, and I was in a moment a couple of years after the election of the last election, where I was really feeling numb and stuck. And I had been doing this work, as Catherine knows and said, for about 20 years. More than hours, 20 years. And so I couldn't figure it out still. And so I wrote this as a really simple way to figure out, where I am. And I just wanted to kind of, hold space for some of what folks are saying. Like, it feels like a roller coaster. It changes from hour to hour, enraged, uncertain, also motivated and serious, encouraged by how many people are dedicated, even guilty, right? I think there are people who feel that they're very clear about what their privileges are right now, right? And there is a sense of guilt or shame as well. Feeling exhausted, apathetic. So just wanted to really hold space for what everyone is coming into this moment with, and hopefully seeing each other and seeing that we're all kind of going through similar feelings and energy levels is somewhat helpful, right? Yeah. So thank you so much. What can folks get out of it was the question that Catherine had, especially in these moments. So one of the key outcomes is that I hope that the framework will help all of us get in alignment. That is, to get in right relationship. And a lot of folks in Native and Indigenous communities I have learned from talk about that. How do you get in right relationship, right? With your values, with your purpose, with the world around you. And so that is why this particular framework in the middle circle has a space for you to name what your values and purpose is and are. And these will shift from time to time, perhaps, right? We put a few in here for you to look at, like solidarity, justice, liberation, equity, but there might be others that are important to you as well. Resilience, connection, whatever it is that speaks to you. The second thing that it could do is to actually catalyze and be clarifying, especially in a time of crisis. So as Catherine mentioned earlier, how can this moment be a moment where this framework can be helpful? Well, a lot of folks are talking about this as a crisis point, especially the pandemic, right? And so this framework, if you use the reflection guide in particular, can help to figure out greater self-awareness. It can catalyze some action steps, right? And it can also help to course correct, like, oh, I was going in the wrong direction and I need to get in right relationship with my values, so I'm switching a little bit, right? And I would also encourage you on the map in the middle circle to write down the moment that calls you, right? If you feel like it's the movement for Black lives that you're interested in connecting with, or if it is COVID-19, post-COVID-19 society, if it is something in your neighborhood, on your campus, whatever the context is, you can put that in there. And then the last outcome is sustainability. How are we going to sustain ourselves, and how are we going to sustain our ecosystems? And so these are the three outcomes that could come up while you work through it: alignment and getting in right relationship, catalyst and clarity in crisis, and sustainability for yourselves as well as your ecosystem, so that we are able to do this for the long run and we're effective and we win. So those are some outcomes that you could come up with.
Thank you so much, Deepa. It's so helpful to see, what this can be used for. I'm just curious how people can use this framework now that they know what it can be used for.
Yeah, of course. And I think we're going to put up the map as well in a little bit if folks want. And as we do that, just want to echo what Catherine said. Ask questions. If you have questions about the roles, if you have questions about the reflection guide, if you have questions about how to use it, being trained on it, whatever it is, just feel free to ask. Yeah.
I'm going to try to put up the map, but
yeah. We'll do our best. Is it possible to show the framework as Deep explained? Someone asked about a personality test. Yeah, I'll try to get to those questions for sure. So the map is a 3-step process in terms of using it. And the way to use it is if you can actually use it with all 3 components. All of these 3 components are in one document on buildingmovement.org. And Catherine will also share the web link as well again. But the main thing that I want folks to think about is to identify those 3 components first, right? So one is the map, the colorful map. The second is the roles that are explained. And then the third is a reflection guide. And I just can't say enough about using the reflection guide. Please use it. I think it's useful. The other thing I wanted to say, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is that you're more than welcome to add to the map, right? So if you print it out and you say, you know what, I can think of other roles that I play, that's up to you. The only thing I wanted to clarify is that we're not talking about job titles, we're talking about roles, right? So someone the other day said, well, I'm a fundraiser. Is that a job? Is that a role? And I think that's a job, right? So the question then is to identify, well, what role do you play when you fundraise? Are you a builder? Because you're raising money in order to help organizations sustain themselves, right? So a little bit deeper in terms of not just job titles, but roles. So 3 ways to use it, 3-step process. Step 1, identify your values and context in the middle circle. So I might put down in this moment, I want to be helpful in terms of post-COVID recovery, and my values are a new society that is based on interconnectedness and sustainability. Those are the values. As you do that, after you do that, map your own roles. So think about, well, what roles am I playing right now, right? And I often find myself playing the role of a frontline responder. And I might also put some other pieces in as well. And then map your ecosystem. And your ecosystem is whatever you want it to be. It could be your neighborhood, it could be your family, it could be your place of work, it could be a coalition, a network, it could be a movement, right? And oftentimes it can even help to do this in multidimensional ways, to have them stack on top of each other. So that's up to you. So the first step is to identify values, context, and map. The second step is to reflect and learn. And so that's where the reflection guide comes in. And I also encourage you to add more questions. The questions I wrote are the ones that have been helpful to me, that I've used in trainings and workshops. You might have many more that you want to add. And then ask yourself, what stories emerging about you? What stories emerging about your ecosystem, right? So some of the stories that often emerge, and this happens to me often, is I'm trying to play every single role on that map, which is not sustainable at all, right? Or I sometimes find myself playing the same role over and over again. And I ask myself, well, why do I always have to be a frontline responder? Why can't I not do that anymore? Especially because it takes a toll on me, right? How do I move into another role? Who are the people that I need to learn from in order to move into a role that speaks to me? So I am interested for myself into being more of a weaver. And I have found that talking to other people who are weavers, I can't say that word, weaver, helps me to understand how to move there. So the reflection questions will tell you the story that's emerging about you, but it can also tell you the story about your ecosystem. So for folks who are using this like at the board level with your board of directors, or you're using it with your coalition, you might say, you know what, we've got a lot of visionaries. You know, those people who are able to kind of speak at the mic and they get their vision across really quickly, but we don't have a lot of builders. So that might be why we're not getting anything done, right? We're able to put the statements out, but we're not able to kind of get the actual programming in place for our communities, or whatever the case. So it can help you kind of understand if your ecosystem is sustainable or effective. Then last, third step is to plan or course correct. So set, you know, however many you want, 1 to 3. I always say only 3, less than 3. 1 to 3 small action steps, and what Jim Collins calls the BHAGs, bold, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGS, right? Bold, hairy, audacious goals. And I think he had something there. Jim Collins wrote this in a book called Built to Last, which is more sort of in the corporate sector, but I think there's something about the BHAGs for each of us. So how can you put a couple of smaller steps and then one BHAG that'll help you be audacious? So those are the three steps: map, reflect, and learn about the story that's emerging, and then plan or course correct. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Deepa. I know we wanted to show the map, but I know how I'm supposed to do it, but I can't see the option to get the map to show up. So it's on our Instagram, it's on our website, the link is in our bio. We'll share it out frequently. Moving on to our next question. There's a lot of questions about how to choose your role and like where to find yourself. So I'm wondering who can use this map.
Yeah, so some really quick questions. Can you restate the book title that I mentioned on the BHAGs? It's called Built to Last by Jim Collins. And you know, I like this question about, can you show an example of a completed map? Yeah, I think that's a great, so I usually do that when I train. When I do a training, I show some. So maybe that's something we can do next time, Catherine. Actually, we can show a couple of maps so you all can see how it is. Okay, so let's talk about the roles, right? So the question is, how do you narrow them down? Is that it?
And who can use it?
Oh, who can, okay, so let's start there. So who can use the map? Anybody can use the map. And you know, that's one of those things where it's like, who are you writing this press statement for? Everyone in the world, right? But in this case, I actually do think that anyone can use the map. I have seen it being used in lots of different ways. I recently heard from a teacher who teaches first grade, and she's going to use it with her first grade students, right? I've heard from folks in the corporate sector who are using it to interrogate their own privilege in terms of how they're standing up for Black liberation in this moment. I have heard from activists who are using it in trainings as conversation starters. I have seen folks who are using it at the board level, like board of directors, to figure out how their roles interplay with each other. So really, and I've also seen students and educators and universities use it. So honestly, I think that it can be something that can really help in terms of identifying getting in right relationship with your values and purpose, figuring out how to catalyze yourself in a particular moment, right? And then identifying your roles in the ecosystem. So pretty much, I think anyone can use it if they want to. I also recommend using it sort of when you need to do a reset, right? Someone said they used it with their high school students. That's great. So you could use it as a reset if you're feeling a little bit stuck. It's a good time to use it. You could use it on a quarterly basis, the beginning of the year, right? So there are lots of different times. And for organizations, staff meetings, staff retreats, you know, if you have smaller groups within your organization's teams and departments that are working towards a bigger cause, they can use it and then identify how they're contributing to the larger purpose of the organization. So that's who can use it. And then there was a question, Catherine, about the roles themselves.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of questions about like how to choose the roles, if you can have multiple roles. So I'm wondering if you can speak to the compatibility of some of the roles that are existent and how, you know, some examples of those.
Yes. So it is, we all play multiple roles, right? The context sometimes requires us to play particular roles than we did at another time. So one thing to remember is that the roles can change. And it's good for them to change, right? It reflects our interest in doing some self-awareness, our interest in learning, our interest in being mentored, and to step up the best way that we can. Our roles, as I mentioned earlier, are not about our jobs, but they are connected. And Sarah is asking this question right now, which I think is really important. They are connected to your skills and your strengths, right? So that is always important to think about. We usually are playing roles that are connected to our skills and our strengths. If we're feeling misaligned, that's something to obviously think about right then and there, right? So you can play multiple roles. I just would caution folks from playing all the roles. And I would also encourage you to think about how you can diversify the roles that you're playing from context to context. So just a couple of examples. So I've trained and talked to folks who say, you know, I have played the same role for 20 years. I have always been a builder. What does that mean, right? I am the person that when there's a program that needs to happen, I know how to program it out. I know how to put together the TikTok for the event. I know how to write the program plan. I know how to email everybody so they know when they're supposed to do it at the right time. So I know how to do it, right? But people say who are builders, I want to take all that knowledge and I want to be a visionary at times, because all of that knowledge of building has given me a really good sense of what could happen better, right? What could be more effective? So rather than tinker at in an incremental way, I'd like to think about being a visionary. So that's an example of how a builder could be a visionary. Builders and visionaries also work very well together. So if you are a visionary, that means that you're somebody who can generate like the boldest possibilities, right? You can remind people of where we're headed. It often helps for visionaries to have builders on their team who can then take that vision, or experimenters, right, on their team who can innovate with that vision. So I think that it's also interesting to look at, and I think Sarah had actually asked this in her follow-up question, can you use this to figure out gaps on your team? Yes. I think once you recognize that you are perhaps a visionary, then you might want to look at your ecosystem and say, you know what, I'm a visionary, come up with these big ideas, but I really need some help to make them practical, right? So that's where a builder or an experimenter might be useful. And then one more example I'll give is people who are frontline responders and people who are caregivers and healers. I often think that it's important to have these folks near us, right? So for example, when I did my map a couple of months ago, and I think Catherine knows this, I recognize that I am a frontline responder, but that I didn't really have any healers or caregivers in my ecosystem. And that was really clear to me when I did it. So I asked myself, as I went through the reflection guide, I am exhausted and fatigued and out of capacity. And it would be so great if I could turn to and lean on someone who's a caregiver, who nurtures and nourishes, right, the people around them, or a healer, someone who recognizes and can hold space for me, right, in terms of what I might be experiencing and connected to the bigger picture. And so recognizing that helped me also realize that those people are in my life. I know who they are. I just don't ask them to play those roles. So even on a personal level, right? Let's put aside the team or workplace, even on a personal level, it can help us to recognize, and I have done this, I have texted people and said, I kind of need you to be here for me while I am working on this one campaign. Can you just check in on me a little bit more than you usually do? And so it can also help us to make plans like that, to ask people to help us out.
Thank you so much, Deepa. I think a lot of people are really like expressing appreciation around some more concrete examples for these roles. But I think the whole point is that they're intentionally very open so that people can reflect on their own ecosystems on their own. So can you maybe speak to why the reflection guide would be useful?
Yeah, so the reflection guide is divided in a couple of ways. The first set of questions are really about you as you map out your individual roles, right? And so it'll ask you questions like, how do you feel about playing this role that you mapped? Does it give you energy? What toll does it take? Or what is the effect on you psychically, emotionally, mentally, and physically of playing a role? I can tell you that, you know, when I used to play more of a frontline responder or disruptor role, all of those things were in the deficit for me, physically, psychically, emotionally, all of that, right? But there are others who can play that role and not have those deficits. And so that's also important to remember. So that's, I think, one way you can think about it in terms of how does it affect you. That question is in there. Another question is, and I mentioned this earlier, querying your privilege, right? So some of the questions that folks might want to ask is, as I am playing a particular role, what are the privileges that allow me to play that role? And is there a way for me to actually use that privilege in a way that connects more people to also be in those roles as well, right? Or am I exerting too much power in a particular way? And do I need to actually think of another role to play? And that's the other piece of this, right? It's not to say that you have to step out of the ecosystem. It's to say that there might be different roles that you can play. And in different times, different roles are called for. And then another set of questions after the individual are about sustainability, which we've talked about already, right? How do you take care of yourself and your well-being? How do you do this for the long run? And then the second set of questions are about the ecosystem. So what does it say about your ecosystem? What are the gaps? What are the possibilities? Do you need to bring other folks into your ecosystem? Do you need to shuffle roles around? And then the third set of questions are around taking action. So what are the steps you want to take in terms of your own plan of action?
Thank you so much. We've had a couple questions come in, so I'm hoping we can move on to that section. And if anyone else has any more questions, please submit them to the comment section. So first of all, let me see.
And we'd also love to know, as Catherine's looking through, we'd love to know what you want to hear about on the next two Insta Lives that we're doing. So we're doing them every Friday at noon Eastern in June. And so are there specific aspects of this framework you want to hear about? I'm also thinking of special guests. So look out for that as well. Okay, go ahead, Catherine.
Thanks, Deepa. So this question from Kathy is, do you need a trained facilitator to do this? If you want to do a workshop or present it to like a larger group.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Kathy. So I would say I would answer that in a couple of ways. One is that I am going to be doing some train the trainer workshops. So please make sure that you follow us, Building Movement, on our website, Twitter, etc., so that you're aware of when those could happen. So I'm going to do some of those for folks to learn how to use it if you're going to use it. Otherwise, I also, I think many of you do this work, right? If you already train, if you already facilitate, I think I encourage you to take what is there and use the reflection questions and stay true to, I think, the spirit of this framework in order to use it. Lots of folks have already been using it. That's why I don't think you have to be trained, but I'm also going to do some train the trainer workshops as well if folks are interested.
Thanks, Deepa.
Yes, online train the trainers. Yes, that is
right. Two kind of related questions from Carla and Isabel. Once you know your role, how can you leverage like the strengths of your role to reach your full potential and turn it into actionable items?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think once you know your role and you're clear about it, it depends on your context, you know, what you put in the middle circle. So, for example, if you recognize that you are a storyteller and that you have the ability to share community stories and experiences and use different media to do that, and if you also identify that your focus in this context might be around supporting the movement for Black lives, right? Then one thing you could do is think about how to use your storytelling capacity to uplift that, right? So perhaps it is to document uprisings that are happening in your community. Perhaps it is to do a series of video interviews with people who are getting involved all of a sudden and engaged, right? And whatever you do, though, it's important to also connect to the folks who are leading and organizing on the front lines and to ask, would this be in service to you, right? So if you also are connected to organizers at the local level who are focusing on organizing the uprisings, you could ask them, can I be useful to you by doing something like this, right? So that, again, we're talking about this work not in isolation. And this is something I really want to make clear, that this work is about social change. It's about changing the systems and institutions and practices that are embedded in a lot of oppressive structures and beliefs, right? From colonialism to patriarchy to white supremacy to capitalism. And so part of this is about upending those structures and institutions and policies as well. So whatever our role is, it is connected to changing those systems so that we have solidarity and equity and liberation and interconnectedness. So that's one example of how once you know your role and you know the context, you can make a connection.
Thank you so much, Deepa. I think it's really helpful to have action items because a lot of people can identify with these roles, but then not know what to do next. So that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm kind of combining a lot of questions because they seem to be touching on similar issues. So some people have asked about how to recognize burnout, and I think it's tied into accountability and how you can, practice self-care if you're already a caregiver. So those are kind of separate questions, but if you could.
That's great. No, I think you're right. They're connected. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important to recognize that many folks who are engaged in social change work are experiencing direct or vicarious trauma. Just in the line of, book suggestions, I recommend Trauma Stewardship and The Age of Overwhelm, which are books by Laura van der Noot-Lipsky. And they're really great guides if you're kind of going through that sense of overwhelm and you're carrying it. So recognizing burnout, can happen in different ways. And I speak from personal experience. So I'm not an expert on this topic, so it is an experiential response. It can show up in lots of ways. It can show up physically, right? Inability to sleep is one example. It can show up in terms of our emotional responses, so being quick, being irritated. It can show up in terms of just feeling disconnected or numb sometimes as well, right? So it shows up in different ways like that. And yet we keep pushing because we're connected to the cause. But it is important to actually figure out how to sustain our well-being. Doesn't mean leaving the movement or leaving your activism. It could mean switching the role. It could mean taking a pause to reflect, right? It could mean asking others, am I showing up burned out to you and fatigued and exhausted? How am I showing up, right? So those are some ways of recognizing it. For caregivers, that's a fantastic question. I think that was asked. How do caregivers practice self-care? Because I think that we have to remember that even folks who are caregivers, and these are folks, again, who are nurturing and nourishing the people around them, who might be the disruptors or the frontline responders or the visionaries, that those folks also need care. Right? It's not just a one-way street, right? And so for caregivers too, understanding, and this is one of the reflection questions, who is part of your care network, right? Who do you turn to and what do you turn to? Because sometimes we don't have to turn to people, we can just turn to our inner selves or meditation or writing or breath work. So what is it that you yourself are also turning to in order to make sure that you're able to show up for others? So those are some responses to that.
Thank you, Deepa. We're at 12:35 right now, so we're at a little bit over the 30-minute mark. I
But
just want to recognize.
we'll stay a little bit
Yeah,
longer. If y'all
I
have
think people are
questions, I'll stay.
let's see. There are a lot of questions around action items and any concrete accomplishments that you've seen
Yeah.
as a result of this framework.
So actually, Catherine, before, because some people might jump off because it's the 30-minute mark, maybe we should talk a little bit about the use of it. And also maybe you could start off by telling everyone where to find everything as well.
Sure. So just a reminder to everyone that this is going to be saved to our IGTV. We'll also find a way to take out, all the important action items and questions and distill them in an easily shareable way. You can also follow us on Twitter at BLDING Movement. You can check out our website, buildingmovement.org, and we'll share updates on our Instagram about the next couple of calls the next couple of live streams that we have coming up.
Great. And if folks are also interested, you can follow me at Deepa Iyer on Insta. It's a public profile. You can also find me on Twitter, which is where I'm usually at DVIYER. And as Catherine said, along with the information being provided, we're going to end along with the other two Insta Lives. Please feel free to contact me if you would like a workshop or training. I am doing these online, right now for folks around the country, for organizations, for workplaces, for educators. So feel free to reach out to me. And if it's something that I can help with, I'd be happy to do that. In terms of how to use the material, so really quickly, there are some parameters we just want folks to be here, reminded of. You can remix and share and copy and distribute the framework. You can adapt it as well. But if you are adapting it, we ask you to be true to the intent of the original framework. You're also welcome to reach out to me to make sure it's okay. It's all licensed under what's it called? Creative Commons, right? Yes, a Creative Commons license. You'll find that information on the documents that Catherine mentioned that are online. And the only thing that we want to just kind of remind folks is that it can't be used for commercial use, just because we want it to be an open source material that people can use and adapt and all of that. So I think that is all I wanted to say about that. And let's see, are there any last questions? Concrete examples. Okay, sure. So I guess people are using it in a couple of different ways. As I said, in the school setting, I've noticed that educators are using it with students, just for students to kind of even understand what their roles could be, right? Even if it's not in a particular context, like what are your skills? What are you sort of drawn to? Are you more of a guide? Are you more of a storyteller? So even to raise awareness with folks and raise consciousness in that way, even if there's no action step, it can be useful. Other folks obviously want to use it for action. So teams, organizations, boards, workplaces are using it to identify gaps in their ecosystem. To say, okay, we've got too many folks, which is fine, right, doing one or two roles. And that's not aligned with our mission and purpose. So that might be why we're not actually able to see the outcomes of our mission and purpose. So just as an example, if your organization is really focused on advocacy, right, and it wants to raise awareness, that's kind of the focus. If you find that all of the people or most of the people in your ecosystem are builders, and that might actually be difficult for you then to connect with other movements that you also want to reach. You might find that you're in a silo, talking to the same people all the time. So you might then say, having a weaver, someone who can actually thread the through lines between what we're doing and what other folks are doing in other movements and other communities, might be really helpful to us. So we're not just reaching the same people all the time. So that's another concrete example. And then the third way that people take action is, again, for themselves, to say, okay, I've identified that I want to be really present for, a neighborhood, or I'll just use a PTA that wants to do work on racial equity, right? A parent-teacher association. They could then say, let's figure out what our roles are in that, right? How do we get there? How can we take action? What are the ways in which we want to take these roles and actually turn them into action steps to put together a racial equity policy for our school? So those are examples of either using it to raise awareness or to do a reset for yourself, or to actually make changes in your team, to all the way to changing a policy.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Let's see. I think it would be a really great idea next week to do a kind of example mapping, just so people can see.
Yeah, we'll do that. We might do ours. If you want to send us yours, we'll be happy to look at yours and provide some comments as well. So yeah, we will definitely do something like that next week.
Thank you. Is there anything else that folks would want to see or hear about next week?
Yeah, someone asked, there's this one question that I feel comes up often, which is around integrations with other, like personality tests or the Enneagram or astrology signs. So first of all, I am really interested in all of that just on a personal level, but I don't know that this can be integrated into all of that. But if you are able to see connections, please share them with us, right? I will say that, I have noticed, that sometimes there are some connections definitely with the personality, like the Myers-Briggs. People have said there are some connections, or even astrology or Enneagram work. So there might well be. I will say that that's a lot of what I read. So it could have actually subconsciously, been integrated into this as well. And I'm actually working on something like that. So if you are, I saw someone who said they're a psychologist. So if you are somebody who's steeped in that work, I'd love to hear from you, because I am interested in thinking about an assessment tool that folks can take in order to figure out what roles they might be drawn to, etc. So just reach out to me, please, and we can see if we can work together.
I'd also like to lift up some of the work that Aaliyah Neely did. After your live stream with her last week, she made a resource list for each role, like a reading list. So you can follow her at sunshine_Aaliyah. I'll also share it on our Instagram so you can get to it easily. But it's a really good reading list designed for each role. And you can read all of them, but if you're focusing on a specific role. And
Aaliyah is fantastic. And she did that actually around the movement right now for Black liberation. So it's focused on, right, the readings connected to roles, but for that context and that purpose as well.
Let's see, what do you think, Deepa? Should we keep doing questions, or?
Yeah, we can until you all leave. We can do them for 5 minutes more, I think.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to what right relationship and alignment means?
Yeah. Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm still figuring it out too, but I think that what it means is that sometimes we can get so caught up in what we're doing and what we've always been doing that there's a disconnect between what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? So then there's a misalignment. And this shows up in different ways. So, you might feel that you're feeling unclear about how to show up right now, for example. I think this question actually came, I think I saw someone ask this question around being a non-Black person of color trying to show up right now in the movement for Black liberation, right? So there might be an alignment in terms of wanting to do that and an aspiration and a longing to do that, but unclarity in terms of exactly how to show up. And so again, the mapping might help. So once you kind of recognize that that's the context, and it is also, those are the values, right? To be in solidarity is a value in this moment as a non-Black person of color. Once that's recognized, I think then it's to look at the map and try to identify how you usually show up, right, in solidarity moments. And to ask them the questions of, are there more effective ways I can show up? Are there ways that this moment demands of me that I need to change my role or adjust it? What can I be in service to? So asking, folks who are actually leading that movement, right, directly, what is it that they need and want? I know that, at least in the work I've done around solidarity, some of the asks of non-Black people of color have been to, one, lift up the demands of the movement, right? And two, to really confront and talk about anti-Blackness within our own communities, within non-Black people of color communities, right? And it's not just to talk about anti-Blackness, it's also to talk about other forms of oppression that show up in non-Black people of color communities, right? The ways in which we other each other, even within our communities. So how do we other each other, and how do we actually also other Black folks, right? So that might be a real need that is called upon in the moment as well. So those are just some examples of how to use the map to identify how you can be in service, how you can be as effective as possible, and is there something specific that this moment demands of you because of the identity or the role that you have.
Thank you, Deepa. I think it's really good to lift up the fact that this is a very adaptive framework, and I think it's evident in the fact that you have been building on this. Someone asked, how did you even come up with this? And it's in the framework, but can you talk a little bit about how you first came up with it and how it's changed since then?
Yeah, I think that the way you characterized it is just right. It is actually really adaptive, and it's evolving, and it's generative. This is the third iteration of it that you all are seeing this year. And so what that means is that you can also adapt it and change it too, right? And that's why I said there might be other reflection questions that come up for you that you want to add to the list. There might be other roles that you want to add to the list. Just remember that they should not be jobs, right? But they're roles that you want to add. And then you can use it in a multidimensional way. So you can use it for yourself in your smaller ecosystem, and then you can use it, you can kind of stack it in terms of broader ecosystems, because we're all part of our workplaces, our volunteer work, our communities, our neighborhoods, our alumni associations. There's so many different ecosystems we're part of, right? And so to get a good understanding of how you show up. And it also is really personally, I think, affirming. For me, I can say that I play 5 roles consistently now. And I like knowing that, because when I'm in spaces, I kind of have a good point of entry to start from, because I know that I play these 5 roles in other spaces, and I know that I am decently good at them, right? And that people appreciate and respect that I play those roles. So it started in, I think, 2017. I think I mentioned where I was feeling a little bit lost about my role in terms of all of the different movements around immigrant justice and racial justice, dealing with everything that we've seen, right, over the past 4 years in terms of how people of color, Muslim communities, immigrants, asylees, refugees have all been mistreated and othered and excluded, how queer and trans people have been excluded, even in terms of every identity place that every place that they're in a way, right? And so when you think about all of these exclusions and all of the ways in which people are othered from a policy level, for me, it just was a moment, and I think someone wrote this earlier, like the seesaw of outrage and numbness. That's kind of how I felt. And so that's where it started. And as Catherine mentioned, it has evolved and it has changed a little bit. And the way that it's evolved and changed is mainly because I've been doing workshops and taken it to community. And so as I've been in community spaces with folks, people have asked really brilliant, insightful questions. And that has been helpful to kind of change it and tweak it as well.
Thank you so much. I think people really appreciate hearing that, that it's always going to be changing based on the crisis at hand.
Yeah. All right. Well, I feel like that's great. I'm so excited that so many people showed up. I want to just end by saying I really hope that this framework will help you show up in your authentic self, and also help you to reach and stretch for the roles that you want to play. And that at the end of the day, that we're doing this to build our power, right? And our collective, our individual and our collective liberation. So hopefully this will allow us to show up more intentionally and to also be self-reflective as well. So thank you for being here. A huge thank you to Catherine Foley at Building Movement Project, who is an amazing and inspiring colleague to work with. And thank you to all of you for using this, for asking questions. And we look forward to seeing you next Friday at noon Eastern. And we'd love it if you could, share this information with 2 people in your network at least, right? And ask them to also show up next Friday, because we'd love to reach as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm. And just as a reminder, we'll be saving this to our IGTV, so you can share that as widely as you want.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Be safe. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.